From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Digital Banter. Got a lot to talk about today, but to just kick things off, one thing we're not talking about is the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we are.
No, we're not. Forget it.
We're gonna maybe gotta rig something here, right?
Rig what?
How do you feel about that call at the end of the game?
Ticky tack. Let's just leave it at that.
Wait, we talked about gambling a little bit here. I gotta tell you about my bet of the weekend. So it was called the comeback thriller bet. It was one of the sponsored bets on FanDuel. And what I bet was that the Eagles would go into halftime up with more than 9.5 points, and that the over was going to hit for the game because it was going to be a back and forth, exciting offensive game, and that the Chiefs would come back and win. All that played out.
You put money on it or no?
Yeah, I put money on it. Not a lot. $10. I'm not a real gambler, but it was like 700 to 1 odds that would be the way that the game played out. So I don't know, $10 times $70. It's a pretty good deal.
All right, so you're not going to be featured on the next Rounders, but at least you got some.
No. Not like I had a buddy of mine who won $27,000 on a Super Bowl square.
Yeah,
so
it's a little excessive.
He did okay.
But back to today's topic, because let's not talk about the birds. We're talking about influencer marketing, specifically as it relates to B2B brands, getting started with influencer marketing. And the reason we felt that today's topic would be a good one to kind of expound upon is given all of the shifts in the B2B space, but also where we're coming from the D2C, B2C consumer side of things of influencer marketing. Everybody out there from TikTok to Instagram to Facebook originally before that, between product placements, celebrity endorsements, and influencers, you have the Kim Kardashians all the way through to all the Super Bowl commercials, right? And the reason that we are bringing it up today is because there's been a shift over the last couple of years, especially since the beginning of COVID, towards influencer marketing for B2B brands. And as we kind of have looked at it from the outside in as an agency, we see a lot of opportunities here, but we also see a lot of challenges and barriers that brands and individuals kind of create for themselves to getting started here. And that's why we felt today's topic would be a good one. James, you want to kind of jump on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing that I'm excited about is, like we talk about all the time, B2B picking up things from D2C. Like, you're actually starting to see B2B brands focus on influencers, shift to the space. I mean, they're finally getting out of some of the old tactics that have been around forever and modernizing things a bit. So it's exciting to see, and I wouldn't even say it's been a change over the last couple of years. Like, this is something that's like new. I would say almost in 2023 is like when you started to see it last year, but like, it's definitely going to take off this year, especially with like less money spent on paid media. I think people are trying to do things organically more. I mean, influencers is a pay to play space for the most part, and that's what we'll be talking about. But I think it's a creative way to be unique and different.
But let's set the stage here as far as when you say pay to play. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer for some B2B brands, though. And that's the one thing that we should set the record straight here before we get into the meat of the conversation. Is historically, you hear influencer marketing, you're thinking about endorsements. You're paying an influencer, Kim, LeBron, whoever, right, to talk about your product on their social channels or wherever they are most present. And you're paying a premium for that. And while the same exists in some facets of B2B, look, at the end of the day, given the niche markets, the niche audiences that are prevalent across the entire ecosystem of B2B, it's a lot different and it's a lot more diversified. And that same playbook that exists on the B2C side of things is more nuanced when it comes to B2B, because yes, you have the pay to play models, but you also have the grow within evangelist and advisor models that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So it is a little bit more of a diversified ecosystem when it comes to influencer marketing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to go about, how creators get paid for their work too. I mean, essentially what I feel like it really started with is like affiliate marketing. Let's talk about like D2C for a second, because there's been influencer marketing started with an involvement of a celebrity endorsement, right? Like you said, LeBron, Kim Kardashian, like that's not even influencer marketing anymore. Influencer marketing is like Instagram models doing their Amazon haul stuff, right? Like the stuff that everybody, I mean, I watch it in the fishing space. My wife watches it in clothes. We're not talking about people with millions and millions and millions of followers, because an influencer can scale from somebody who specializes in a small niche market, great for B2B, to, everything that's more broad and generic. And that's where, I think it is important to note that there is like a very wide spectrum of it, and how person on that spectrum monetizes their influence is different. If you're really big, a brand's going to reach out to you and say like, hey, 15 grand and to talk about my product, 100 grand to talk about my product, versus a small influencer who may be just getting started. It's like, okay, here's your affiliate link. We'll pay you 20% of any product that comes from that.
Yeah. And with that, that's a great kind of example there, where the majority of influencers out there are self-made influencers. They're ones that have developed their own brand, their own voice, and have created enough of a following that you can jump on the coattails of, or you can look at it as an inspiration for your own brand, an individual voice. But I think the thing to kind of set the stage here as relates to influencer marketing for B2B is the fact is it's the same playbook that has been prevalent in B2B for so many years, right? Go back to traditional marketing as it relates to events and sponsorships and that type of area of B2B marketing, right? What are aspects of that playbook? Leveraging a niche audience that has been built by somebody else, right? Trade shows, conferences, trade publications and industry publications, the Forresters, the Gartners, right? With those, that it's a pay-to-play model, though. And as the buyer on the other side of that, that the brand that is being featured in those articles and in those publications specifically, Gartner, Forrester, have paid a premium to be in them. The other aspect of that playbook is getting in front of a captive audience. So being at trade shows where you have a network of individuals that are coming in to either hear sessions of speakers or walk the floor and see what new things are out there, from CES or South by Southwest, all the way through to more specific things, the boat show at the Javits Center in New York, which I know James goes to literally every year because he needs a new boat every year, or other conferences that exist out there. And the last part of that playbook is essentially buying a space to drive leads. So sponsorships of the events, booths, all of those materials that you are investing in as a brand to have your name front and center within your niche audience, that captive audience that is essentially in person. But here's where the transition is happening as you look at those in-person historical event sponsorship influencer type of marketing endeavors is happening as we look towards the future, but also the last 6 months or a couple years, as James and I were just saying, is here's what those things lack. They lack true reach. You have a one-time deal. You're in front of somebody for X amount of minutes or seconds at a booth, or you are just basically a one-hit deal as far as being in a single location for X amount of time. So therefore, you don't have longevity. You don't have scalability of these, so to speak. Yeah, you have multiple conferences or trade shows you can go to. You can run the circuit and you can have nurture streams and sequences and all the follow-ups that may be in place after the show or even before the show. But at the end of the day, you're confined to the attendees that have been at the show, at the conference, or maybe made the list and just couldn't make the trip. So you can't really build off of those things to the extent where you can in other ways, where you are creating the trust, you are creating the content, you're owning the narrative through other means and different communities, like there is with influencer marketing. And again, that's going back to what we were saying before, self-made influencers riding the coattails of others towards creating your own voice. And I think the actual thing here that is most important is when we look beyond the business side of this aspect of things, and we look beyond just marketing and sales and the outcomes that we're looking for as a business, is the creation of culture and professional development that exists when you are cultivating an environment that breeds the notion of being a self-made influencer and really a content creator at whatever scale it may be for yourself and for your brand. Think about the cultural impact of that as motivation, as kind of teamwork and rising to the occasion, but also collaboration across different team members and different departments. And on top of that, the professional development opportunities it creates by not just finding your voice, but really identifying your passions, your knowledge base, and building upon that makes you much more well-rounded. And whether that's a T-shaped individual or just a more well-rounded individual, it offers a lot of opportunities outside of just the business metrics and the marketing metrics.
I think the main thing here with how it's similar to what you're already doing. And that's, like you said, the B2B marketing is all about reaching a niche audience. And a lot of the paid sponsorships that are out there right now are leveraging an audience built by somebody else. That's exactly what influencer marketing is. You are taking somebody who has already built an audience, specialized in your niche, and leveraging their audience. Like, it's quite frankly the exact same strategy as sponsoring a industry publication or sponsoring an event, like, because in both of those situations, there's a captive audience that you know is in your niche. And influencer marketing is the same exact way. The only thing that I would argue there is that digital influencers make a much larger impact than some of those do, because their audience is a lot more captive. They're serving content that is more relatable, versus what you said. Like, there's a lot of like risk associated. I don't want to say risk. An event, for example, it's a one-time thing, versus the alternate routes is more of an ongoing thing.
Exactly. And the thing that we are kind of harping on here, and you bring up a good point when you kind of circle back to what I was saying before, James, is the fact that whether you realize it or not, those basic aspects of that playbook are exactly what influencer marketing enables a brand and an individual to achieve, just at greater scale and greater impact. And I think what is difficult here for an internal stakeholder or a brand to realize is the notion of what influencer marketing means, or even content creator means, right? It's been so skewed over the years, and it goes back to what we even started this off about with the examples of Kim, LeBron, et cetera. Oh, you're going to be on TikTok and you're going to be pushing, a SaaS-based solution on TikTok. Well, we're in the manufacturing space and nobody's on TikTok, right? It's all those misnomers and those misperceptions, when it's really about finding the voice, creating the voice, and controlling the narrative outside of those trade publications that you're paying a premium to be featured in. When at the end of the day, people buy from people.
Right. And that is literally how you would go about selling this internally. And I think that's probably like the barrier of B2B marketing in general, is always trying to sell something internally. Like, I think everybody who's a marketer understands that like influencer marketing is big right now. There's a reason that it's big right now. But we're in B2B. So like you said, we're not on TikTok. We're not on Instagram. We're not on whatever. And I think what is happening is that's wrong. They are there. The content that they engage with might be a little bit different. It's not going to be, somebody's not going to TikTok to, I don't know, learn more information on how to design a railway product in CAD software, but they are there for like humor that's associated to their line of work. Like, I don't know how many of you have seen Corporate Bro, Corporate Natalie, like all of those. Quite frankly, they're mocking executives in software companies and how software companies work. But like, I love that stuff because it's hilarious and it's so relatable to what real life is. And there are a lot of people in our industry that would go to them and and engage with their content. And like, that's a great influencer. And then on the same side, like, we have all of the podcasts that we listen to, I also consider influencers, and we'll get into that in a bit.
The other thing here, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole necessarily, but there's so many variables. And I think because of our listener base being very diversified, it's important to note that it's not going to make the most sense for every single market, but it does make sense in many facets based off of who your audience is, how they consume information, and how you're able to engage with them. So a SaaS-based startup is probably going to have a more younger audience, or an audience that is more likely to be on major platforms. TikTok is a great example there from James, LinkedIn, right? Things like that. But when you talk about other verticals and markets, especially when you really start to dive deep into that, aerospace, manufacturing, things like that, generationally, they may not be on those major social platforms. That doesn't mean that they cannot be influenced or still connected with through some other means besides going to a trade show at the Javits Center or being featured in Manufacturing Today, if that publication exists. I don't know. I'm just making it up. But I think you get the point of, it's a matter of identifying who that audience is and finding the ways that you can truly engage with them outside of just speaking at them and to them, but creating that voice for yourself and really playing off of the voice of the customer.
So I agree with you that influencer marketing isn't for everybody, but I think as we get into the meat of this here, where we're about to dive into the fact that B2B influencer marketing presents itself a little bit differently than a lot of the examples that we use to open up this, right? TikTok, Instagram influencers, like that can all be part of it for the right product in the right industry. But, it's about leveraging somebody who's well known in the space, who has an audience. That audience can be in a lot of different areas. It doesn't have to be TikTok, Instagram, the stuff that you're used to. And that's where, like I said, B2B presents itself differently. And I think there's actually more opportunities in B2B than there is in D2C.
And the one note I'm going to add on to that, just because this is kind of how we're going to talk through those varying degrees of influencer marketing, is if an influencer doesn't exist in your space, that opens up the opportunity to be essentially a category creator for yourself and for your brand to become an influencer within that space. So it's not necessarily going back to what we were saying before, a full pay-to-play model, but it's rather just an opportunity that exists out there. So let's dive into some of these, what we'll call varying degrees of influencer marketing when it comes to B2B. The first is kind of what James was talking about before, riding the coattails of others, especially through sponsorship. So James, do you want to dive into that one a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think it's probably best to lead with an example. Podcasting right now is huge. Everybody makes the joke, oh, everybody has a podcast. You create a podcast, everybody has a podcast. But you know what that means? That there's a lot of different podcasts out there that specialize on a specific niche. Like, there are manufacturing podcasts, there are tech podcasts, and it really widely varies. And the way that these podcasts are monetized is through sponsorship. So, we talked about an easy transition from what you're doing now to what a influencer strategy could look like, right? So right now you're paying for an industry trade publication. Say that's the example, right? You get however many visitors to this site that's in your ICP, and you have a nice little banner ad on the top. Versus if you there are industry podcasts that people are listening to, like the person who leads that podcast is an influencer. That with that podcast typically comes almost like product placement. It could be an ad in the beginning. You could go on their podcast as a guest. So all of these things are ways that you are leveraging that influencer's content. Typically with a podcast, though, somebody will also be part of an online community. Like Exit 5 is a big one that I'm part of. He does a podcast, he does content, he does the online community. So those are all different ways that you can have your brand exposed to potential customers. And that could be the same thing in the social space too. That doesn't mean, like, we talk about actual creators, like you can collaborate with creators to do some sort of sponsored content that reaches their audience if their social audience makes a lot of sense. But for some of the more niche stuff, I would say podcast communities, all that stuff, they're typically led by an individual, and that individual has a lot of influence. And that's typically, they'll be able to organize an agreement with you where you're either paying for a sponsorship, paying to get on the podcast, or something along those lines.
And the notes that I was taking as you were saying that, if you think about it just from a pure cost perspective. So what trade shows cost, I don't know, anywhere from $5K up to like $40K more for a booth, right? Okay. No podcast is charging that for like an annual sponsorship, right?
No niche B2B podcast.
No
it costs
niche
a lot
B2B.
of money to get on Joe Rogan,
sure.
if that's what you're trying to do. But
hey, look, if we're on Rogan, man, we're flying high on something. I don't know what, but we're flying high.
Hey, but like even him though, like if you're Salesforce and have a crap ton of money, right? He interviews everybody.
Sure. Where I'm going with this is
Right.
just look from a pure cost benefit ratio. Not only is a podcast going to cost less, but also just think about the longevity behind that sponsorship. You're going on through an entire season, an annual contract, maybe half a year of episodes. However the contract's structured, you're still going well beyond a single shot as it relates to a show where you're reliant on everybody being there in person. And again, controlling the narrative as it relates to your messaging. The other thing too, oh, go ahead, James.
The one thing I was thinking about too is like all of the content that comes out of podcasts and like the longevity that you get from that. I don't know, say like we got on a podcast with a big time B2B software, I don't know, evangelist of some sorts. Like then we're posting content to our brand campaign, our brand page and our personal pages with us talking to that person for however long we feel like it. I mean, it's, run it until it wears out. But, there's the actual podcast itself. There's all the content that comes out of it. There's the ability to leverage their network. Like that's a ton of stuff that you get out of, like you said, a less expensive agreement than your $50,000 trade show booth.
Exactly. And we're talking about podcasts as a main example here, but the same thing exists for other channels and content creator networks. YouTube is another great example, especially as it relates to B2B. Think about the engineering folks, the manufacturing folks. They may not be podcast listeners as much as YouTube visitors and watchers. Same exists when you talk about a YouTube creator and the ability to sponsor them. And James, I mean, you're obviously the fishing guy here, but how many times have you seen that?
Oh, I mean, that's the product placement in YouTube videos. That's like insane, but it's the same, like the how-to content, that's what people go to YouTube for. Like that's a huge, oh man. I mean, we had a client in the graphic design space. They did a lot of like work with Adobe for a while. And this was something I pushed really hard for and never went through, but I mean, there are a million how-to videos on like Adobe with different like design influencers, that kind of stuff. And it's just like a great partnership, because I think great thing about YouTube, even more than a podcast, is that content stays there forever. And if you're doing some sort of like how-to tutorial, or like you come in on as like an expert on something, that content lives there forever and will continue to get views, continue to get exposure. I do think on the podcast side, people may brush over an episode more. I mean, yes, it does live forever, but I think the play there is more about the continued content that you can pull from that episode.
Exactly. And the main point of riding the coattails of others is not necessarily having to invest or embark on challenges that may prevent you from the next approach, which is growing from within, encouraging and fostering key employees, leadership, subject matter experts to be a creator and have a voice in their communities on behalf of not just the brand, but themselves. And I think the big thing there is one of the roadblocks comes down to having a fear of failure, but also a fear of imperfection. And when it comes down to the fact of just going out and doing it, when you remove those barriers, when you remove that fear, you're more open to being that creator and finding that voice. The other thing too, along those lines, is there's a difference between being knowledgeable and having the subject matter expertise to create content. And the difference is being passionate about that at the same time. If you lack the passion, you're kind of just going through the motions. You're in front of the camera, and you're just creating content for the sake of creating content without much enthusiasm, without passion. And people see through that. And really, they see through to the fact of you not really becoming an influencer, but rather just a knowledgeable source that, exists out there.
Well, there's a lot that goes into being an influencer and like in how you present yourself. It's funny, me and a colleague were talking about this the other day. Like, you would be surprised like how like the typical influencer stuff still plays into it, like how you look, how you dress, how you talk, like you said, the passion. There's all of those elements together are what build up a personal brand. And sometimes it's just one or two of those elements that are missing that makes a person not a fit. But the other thing too, when getting and this is something that I'm passionate about, is like, you may not have all of those elements and you may have that fear of failure, but you just have to get started. And if you ever want like motivation of like how to get yourself started, go back and watch your favorite influencer, your favorite YouTuber, go back and watch their first video. Go back and listen to their first podcast. Go back, like if you listen to that first thing, and then you will immediately have the confidence to be able to put yourself out there, because everybody starts somewhere, and it's just being willing to start and continuously improve.
Yeah. I mean, I was the same way. I was very comfortable speaking at conferences, but to have that motivation and momentum to create consistency as a content creator, just creator in general, it's coming back to really just finding the passions and the knowledge sources that align with those passions, and then just being consistent. And I'm a perfectionist at heart, and having others, including James, say like, screw it, just go do it. Having those support mechanisms is huge, and those motivators is huge, but so are the supporting resources based off of what you're trying to achieve. Resources like designers or in-house or external designers that can create content with you, rather than you spending hours trying to figure out Canva or some other tool that you need to take your content creation to the next level. But also, again, having a process for moving beyond, just simply connecting with folks on LinkedIn or other platforms, but truly identifying where you can make the biggest impact for those communities. The other thing before we move out of kind of growing from within that I personally want to mention is, we're not talking about employee advocacy here. We're not talking about just going out and resharing the brand page's content or other people's content, because you're not a creator then, and you're ultimately not going to become an influencer within your space. You're just regurgitating the same information that exists out there without adding your point of view, your spin, your opinion, and really your voice that people want to hear, because you are trying to set yourself up as an expert in the field. James, do you have any examples of kind of grow from within brands and individuals that exist out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every startup SaaS company is doing it at this place, but I always think like the CMO at Metadata is like a big time. I think they do a lot to leverage his personal brand. Chili Piper I feel like everybody who works there has a very powerful personal brand. But yeah, the startup space in general, and tech startups are killing that right now. It's almost weird, because the thing that I wonder is like, first of all, it takes somebody special to work in a startup, because one of the things that I've always thought and heard is that, everybody is working towards the common goal because everybody has a vested interest. And that's why you see a lot more passion with startups. But I don't get how they have the ability to just get everybody on board, speaking towards a common goal in their own unique way and having their own unique viewpoint. The way they build personal brands within those organizations is pretty astonishing. Honestly, I'm like envious of it, because I think that anybody who's really pushed for this will know that not everybody wants to be put out there. Not everybody wants to be the face of the brand. Not everybody is good at speaking, and it's a tough hill to climb. But I think if you get the right people involved, it can be a really good thing.
So the transition from grow within is really moving backwards then as far as those varying degrees. And with growth from within, we're talking about a little bit of a larger set of individuals, whereas the evangelism route is one or two individuals that are essentially being cherry picked out to be the evangelists of the brand, the space, the market, and being looked upon as experts among their peers and experts in the field. Over the years, we've seen everybody from, for those that are going back in time, Avinash for the Google Analytics stuff for so many years. There's plenty of others that when you look across the space that exists from, med tech through to HR tech and other areas. I think the one thing there is when you're talking about evangelists, besides propping up one individual or two individuals, there's an ability to support them in a little bit more deliberate way by giving them resources, by letting them do their thing, because if they're the chief evangelist of your brand, that's probably the only thing that they're doing. They're not worrying about marketing. They're not worrying about sales. They're not worrying about running the business. They wear one hat, and that's preaching to everybody out there about who you are as a brand and what they believe and their expertise as it relates to that.
Well, the most important thing there is that they are an expert in the space.
Correct.
Because what a lot of these companies are doing now is they are going out and hiring a chief evangelist person. And really what that comes out of is what I was saying before. Not everybody is good on camera. Not everybody has the super detailed subject matter expertise. And in order to do that, like every company needs an outward facing person and an inward facing person, somebody who runs the operations and someone who's kind of the spokesperson. In most scenarios, the CEO is the guy who's out there being or gal is being the spokesperson. But there are some situations where that doesn't happen. A lot of the heavy, tech, B2B, like that kind of stuff. Usually, like those are people with engineering backgrounds, like very technical. Maybe they don't want to be forward facing. So they'll hire a chief evangelist who is a really good speaker, very well known in the space, and that person will then become the spokesperson of their company. That's essentially a hired influencer, because usually you're bringing somebody in who has a very nice resume, like a really good background, is typically somewhat well known, and then making that person the face of the company.
And speaking from the CEO role, I'll tell you what, damn difficult to do all of that and still run a business. I love creating content. I love doing the podcast. I love doing our skits that we put out there. I love sharing ideas and opinions and things like that. But doing that in addition to everything else it's a challenge. And I think that's a good segue into the next approach, which is basically building off of that evangelist, whether you're building it from within or hiring, is the hired guns approach, right? Existing content creators that you're going to make employees of your brand and basically leverage them, whether that's the hype route or just as a growing team of content creators that will be out there on your behalf, but have built themselves up to do that effectively without having to kind of go through the growing pains. A great example of that that we've been seeing is just in LinkedIn, the various people that are putting stuff out there, but also getting kind of cherry picked out by various brands.
Yeah, this is something that's new in my opinion, especially in the B2B space. Like, what's funny? Like, it's kind of the Barstool Sports approach. Like, if you think about it though, like, so Barstool Sports, what they'll do is they'll take creators who are already very good, have a brand and a really good podcast or whatever, and they'll invest in a contract with them and take them to the next level. And like, that person, goes from, I don't know, saying they have 100,000 followers and are growing really fast, and they get the Barstool name behind it, and then they take it to the moon. So company that's doing this right now that's pretty impressive is Lavender. So Lavender is an AI email writing tool. It's a personal sales assistant is what they're calling it. I did a demo of the tool. Quite frankly, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not involved in this. I have no use for it, but like the hype behind it made me want to do a demo. And it's like, the tool did breach the hype, which is always a good thing. But what they've been doing is that they've been hiring sales influencers, I'll call them, content creators. Honestly, like they're going the comedy route. They're bringing in a lot of a content team that has very strong followings, a big on TikTok, big on, like, think of it as like the corporate bros of TikTok, right? So they're bringing them in, and that's essentially their marketing team, and they have been absolutely crushing it in the content. Like, it's funny, it's hilarious content, but also educational. So it, like, the way they do it is just amazing. But again, what they're doing is every person that they're bringing in has a following already. So, you know, they're doing this big hype reel of like, oh, who's going to be our next content hire? Who's it going to be? And it ends up being somebody that everybody knows, everybody follows already. So all of the value of that they've built up over time is being transitioned to the brand, and it's working. I think they had a $13 million funding round that closed last week. So
with the hired guns approach, which is what I'm calling this, I think we joke a lot about obviously gambling a little bit, or at least, you know, James's prop bets and things like that. And the hired guns approach is a big bet. You're putting a lot on the table there, not just, you know, banking on these individuals continuing to build upon their following and leveraging those networks that they have created. But from my perspective as an agency leader and as a business leader, I'm betting big on them being a cultural fit. Otherwise, they're just kind of hiring another agency, an external partner to do the marketing for me. So it is, there's some big bets there, and whether it pays off or not, I think still remains to be seen in some cases, besides, you know, Barstool being the non-B2B example here of being successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think culturally it creates a really cool environment, but it's one that you would need to be part of, or else you're not part of it type thing. Like, because, you know, these are people who have really put themselves out there, really, like, I mean, they have all done the same thing. I'm sure their paths are all a little bit different, and there's a lot that they can learn from each other, which probably creates an awesome culture, honestly. But it's like, okay, well, now you also have a team of developers and AI people, like that kind of stuff. So how does that all flow together?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too, I don't want to kind of talk too much about this aspect and approach, but, you know, if they were individuals or they had no handcuffs on before about what they could do, and now they're moving into something that might be a little bit more constrained, like, how do they feel as individuals? Do they still feel as motivated and as enthusiastic around it as they could, or do they feel a little bit more hamstrung? So I think there's a lot of variables with that one. The next approach is the advisor roles. Now, James, I'm going to toss this directly to you to start it off.
This one is interesting. So again, this is more something that's specific to the startup space. So I'm sure everybody who's at least perusing LinkedIn has probably seen that some of the influencers that you follow, the people whose podcasts you listen to, the people whose content you engage with, and we're talking the people who have like pretty solid followings at this point. If you go and look through their employment history on LinkedIn, you'll see advisor at this startup, advisor at this startup, advisor at this startup. And it's twofold, right? So I'm sure there are definitely, and probably most of the time, circumstances where they are a consultant within, say they're on the board or whatever it may be, advising this startup because they typically have a history of success in similar environments. But there's a couple things that come with that. So if you're an advisor on a company, there's connection to venture capital, right? So all of these advisors come with connections to venture capitalists, have experienced fundraising before, are known in the space, right? They already have an audience. People already know, like, and trust them. So for you as a startup trying to raise money, there's a little bit of clout that comes with that. Typically in this scenario too, you'll find that the products in which they're advisors for are talked about fairly frequently on their podcasts. You get a little bit of product placement. The posts of their content will typically lean towards the products that they're advisors in. So it's almost like to me, it's like a hidden influencer strategy where they're trying to make it more of like, no, this person is a strategic advisor to the business, but they're also doing what they can to promote the business and have a decent following. So, you know, I think the pay structures for each of these advisors may be a bit different. You know, they may be paid board members, they may be on a consulting contract. But I'll tell you this, like, they're networks are definitely being leveraged in each one of those scenarios.
Oh, there's got to be equity involved in some capacity. I don't see it being structured in much of a different way than that.
Right. Like I was going to say, like you would never think of that to be influencer marketing, but it absolutely is.
Right. Exactly. And the other thing that you don't think about as being influencer marketing or just gets easily overlooked is collaborations. So we talked about riding the coattails of others, but it goes beyond that, and it looks for cross-pollination of efforts, whether you've got a really strong following yourself and you have the opportunity to partner with somebody that has an equally strong following, or just looking for the collaborations that exist out there that may come your way. A great example of this is just being featured in articles, being a guest on a podcast, regardless of however small that podcast is. And really taking those opportunities as they come to you or creating them for yourself, especially when you're just starting out, because the biggest thing with collaborations is it allows you to get started in a strategic way, but also in a way that allows you to build your voice, create confidence, move past that fear of perfection and fear of failure, and create momentum to yourself to not just do what I just said about finding a voice and creating confidence, but finding your passions that align to that knowledge base that will allow you to then start to become a creator on your own and become an influencer over the course of time, because you need to be a creator before you become an influencer.
Absolutely. You actually mentioned something there that I feel like I wanted to hit on earlier a little bit. No matter how small the audience is the words that you use. And I think that it's really important, especially in the B2B space, to like not be afraid of that. Like if you have a podcast that gets like 1,000 weekly listeners, 2,000 weekly listeners, if every single one of those fits your ICP or like fits the target personas that you're looking for, that's perfect. Like that's the perfect place to start. Probably low cost of sponsorship, but you're hitting all of the right people. And I think that that's overlooked. Like in B2B, we have small audiences. It's okay to have a small audience. You don't want to be on Joe Rogan. Their audience is too big, right? So it's almost like, make sure that you're getting the value that you pay for. But if it's all the right people, like, I don't know, you're targeting CMOs who are listening to a podcast about like what to look for when searching for an agency, and we're an agency and we sponsor that podcast and we're in front of 1,000 CMOs, like that's awesome. Like that's perfect.
I harp on quality over quantity all the time, and that's just a great example of it playing out again. Bringing this to a close, there's a lot of ways in which B2B brands can take advantage of creator marketing and influencer marketing. And it just plays off of those aspects that we talked about early on that are just coming out of some of those traditional event and promotional type of marketing efforts, but in a way that allows you to scale, own the narrative, create a voice, and build a strong culture that leads to professional development and business development. James, any recommendations for our listeners on ways to get started or considerations when it comes to kind of their own influencer marketing initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this early on as far as how you would pitch it internally. It's the same stuff that you're doing right now. You're trying to get in front of a niche audience with your message. And the thing that is great about it is there's far more that you can get out of it than the stuff that you're already focused on. So I would say, if you're spending money on, trade shows is the only thing that you're doing because they've worked for years, like start to take some of that investment and shift it over towards one of the influencer strategies that we talked about today, whatever makes the most sense for your market, and see where it goes. I think that everything is moving online. Everything is moving digital. Influencers continue to take over. I'm expecting exponential growth in influencer marketing this year for B2B companies. And it's about getting on early and getting in with the right people and see where it goes. But I think the main thing, like I said, it fits your current strategy. And as long as you can position and sell that internally, I think it makes a lot of sense.
There we go. All right, everybody. That concludes this episode of Digital Banter. As always, like, subscribe, connect with us on social. And until next time, take it easy.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.